Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into zombies,
The zombies.
but with a twist.
Yes.
We're going way beyond just like the typical like bronze kind of zombies.
Right.
We're going to talk about the psychology of zombies
Right.
with Kevin Volkan,
Yes.
who's a psychology professor who's done a lot of work on this.
He has. And, when you think about it, it's really interesting because his work shows that zombies are more than just these figures of horror that we
Right.
see in movies.
Right.
They reflect deeper anxieties and psychological processes
Yeah.
that I think a lot of people don't really think about.
Okay, so we're not just talking rotting flesh and, chasing people down the street.
No.
There's actual like psychology at work here.
Absolutely.
So what's the deal? Like psychologically, what are we talking about with zombies?
So Volkan, he says that zombies really represent what Freud called the death drive.
Okay.
And this is something that I think is often misunderstood.
Yeah.
Because people hear death drive and they think, oh, so you just want to die. It's not about that. It's more about this primal urge toward a state of non-being,
Okay.
a kind of release from all the complexities of being human.
So less about wanting to be dead and more about just wanting to escape
Exactly.
all the pressures and anxiety. of
Exactly.
being alive.
And, zombies embody this perfectly.
Okay.
I mean, think about it. They lack individuality.
Yeah.
They're driven by these primal urges.
Yeah.
They're just relentlessly pursuing brains.
Yeah.
It's like they're stuck in this state of living death, just
Right.
driven purely by instinct.
Yeah.
There's no real sense of self there.
So in that way, zombies are kind of tragic figures.
Yeah.
When you think about it, like they've been stripped of their humanity.
Yeah.
And they're driven by these primal urges that they can't control.
And that's just one way to look at it.
Oh, there's more.
There's so much more. Because Volkan's work also delves into the historical and cultural roots of zombies,
Okay.
particularly in Haitian and African traditions. And he argues that in these contexts, zombies weren't always seen as these purely monstrous figures.
Interesting.
They were actually a way for people to cope with the trauma of slavery.
Wow.
That's heavy.
It is.
Yeah, that's a really heavy connection.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, imagine this. You're ripped from your home, your family.
Yeah,
You're forced into this system where you have absolutely no control over your own life.
Right.
And then this idea of the zombie is created, right? This being that's stripped of its will.
right.
It becomes a way to sort of repeat and try to master that trauma.
So it's like a way of trying to make sense
Yes.
of an experience that was completely beyond their control.
Exactly. And Volkan actually calls this repetition compulsion,
Okay.
this almost subconscious need to repeat elements of a traumatic experience
Right.
as a way of coping with the anxiety and the powerlessness that's associated with it.
So by creating these beings that embody this loss of control
Yes.
that they experienced
Yes.
during slavery,
Exactly.
they were trying to reclaim some sense of agency. Exactly. And, what's interesting is that it ties into another psychological concept
Okay.
called identification with the aggressor.
What's that?
It's where the victim, as a way of coping, starts to take on the characteristics of the abuser.
Wow.
That's heavy stuff.
That is intense.
Yeah.
And to think that's all kind of woven into this zombie lore.
It's fascinating. Right. But wait, there's more.
Oh, no.
It doesn't stop there.
Okay.
Volkan also suggests that while this concept of zombies might be rooted in this trauma of slavery,
Right.
it's also evolved to reflect some of our modern day anxieties as well.
Okay. I can see that like zombies represent our fear of pandemics.
Absolutely.
Right.
Like that uncontrollable spread,
Yeah.
collapse of society.
And just everything going to hell in a handbasket.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that infectious nature of the zombie plague, I think, really speaks to our anxieties about disease,
Mm-hmm.
but also about the spread of misinformation,
Yeah.
panic violence.
It's like the fear of the other.
Exactly.
That can so quickly become a mob mentality.
Exact. And it's not just about those external threats either.
Okay.
Right.
What else?
There's this internal collapse that happens in a zombie apocalypse as well.
Mm.
It's that loss of reason, the descent into chaos and violence.
It's like those zombie stories where the real horror isn't even the zombies themselves.
Right.
It's what the people become when they're
Ex-
pushed to their limits.
Exactly, because it makes you question, right? When the rules of society no longer apply,
Yeah.
what choices do people make?
Right.
How far are they willing to go to survive?
Yeah. It's a reflection of us.
It is.
As much as it is them.
Absolutely. And it taps into these really deep anxieties about human nature,
Yeah.
about the potential for darkness that I think exists within all of us.
Yeah, you know what's scary about that too is it feels very relevant right now
Oh, absolutely.
with climate change,
Yes.
with political polarization,
Yeah.
with just everything feeling kind of crazy right now.
The world feels very unstable right now.
It feels very easy to
Well,
imagine that zombie apocalypse scenario playing out.
Exactly. And it's no coincidence, I think, that zombie stories have become increasingly popular in recent years
Right.
because they reflect this growing sense of unease about the state of the world.
So we're kind of indulging in our anxieties by
Yeah.
watching these movies and reading these books.
Absolutely.
But in a weird way, it's kind of cathartic.
It is.
Right.
It's like we can confront these anxieties
Yes.
in a safe fictional space
Yeah.
without actually having to live through them.
Yeah, it's like cultural therapy in a way.
Exactly.
We're working through our
Yeah.
collective anxieties by
Yeah.
watching fictional characters navigate
Yeah.
the end of the world.
Exactly.
Which is a very strange thing to think about
It is.
when you say it out loud.
It is, but it's true.
But, I mean, it's true. Okay, so we've talked about zombies a lot and how they represent, like, giving in to those urges and those anxieties. But vampires are kind of different, right? I mean, they're still technically undead, but, like, they're not exactly giving up on being a person, are they?
You're right.
Yeah.
They are different. And that's a great observation because it gets to the heart of how vampires and zombies are different psychologically.
Okay, how so?
Well, with zombies, it's like a kind of surrender to the death drive, you know?
Yeah.
But vampires are more complex. They have this weird back and forth with it.
Back and forth. I don't really get it.
Okay, think about it.
Yeah.
Vampires don't really follow the rules of life and death. They're dead, but they're also kind of alive. And the way they survive is by taking the life force of other beings.
Right. Drinking blood. I get it.
Exactly. They're literally feeding on life to keep themselves undead. It's like a contradiction.
Whoa. Yeah, when you put it that way, it's kind of messed up.
It is. And unlike zombies, who are often just driven by their most basic urges, vampires are usually portrayed as intelligent.
True. Like they make plans and stuff.
Exactly. They're strategic. They
Yeah.
manipulate. They often even have control over the people they prey on.
So it's like zombies are all id and vampires have more ego going on.
That's a really good way to put it. They're more self-aware, more in control of those darker impulses.
Makes sense. And even the way they feed is different too, right? Zombies go for brains, vampires want blood. It's not just about like not starving, is it?
You're definitely picking up on something important here. The way each monster consumes actually tells us a lot about them. Zombies are all instinct. They want brains,
Yeah.
The seat of consciousness.
Almost like they're trying to replace what they lost.
Exactly, like trying to fill that void of their lost humanity. And then you have vampires who crave blood.
Which has always been a powerful symbol.
Absolutely. It represents life force, vitality, even passion.
So for vampires, it's not just about staying alive. It's more like they want to consume the essence of life itself.
Exactly. And the way they usually get that blood through seduction, manipulation, promises of power, it shows a desire for control, for being in charge, that goes way beyond just needing to eat.
This is all starting to sound very Freudian. The id, the ego, the death drive. It's kind of wild how these monster myths are tapping into something deeper.
Freud would have a field day with this, I think. These monster stories, whether we realize it or not, are reflecting our deepest fears, our anxieties, even the things we find fascinating about the darker parts of being human.
Yeah, and they let us do it safely.
Exactly. It's like we can explore these unsettling ideas without having to actually deal with them in real life.
And the weird thing is, those themes still resonate with us, even though our fears have changed.
That's very true. I mean, it's not like we're all walking around terrified of being buried alive and coming back as the undead.
Yeah.
But these stories still hook us.
Exactly.
The monsters might be different, the context might change, but the stuff underneath, the fear of death, of losing control, the possibility of violence and things falling apart, those are things humans have always worried about.
It's like the human experience, I guess.
And when we explore those anxieties through stories, it allows us to work through them in a way that's entertaining, but also kind of comforting.
Yeah, it's like, okay, the world might be a scary place, but at least I'm not facing down a vampire tonight. I can just turn the lights on and forget about it.
Exactly. But it gets even more interesting. Volkan says that even though these monsters are terrifying, they also offer a strange kind of hope.
Hope. From a zombie. You're going to have to explain that one.
Well, it's not really about the monster itself. It's more about what it represents.
Yeah.
By facing these dark parts of ourselves, all those fears of death and disease and society collapsing, by putting them onto these monsters, we can actually start to heal.
Healing. I mean, I love a good zombie movie marathon, but I wouldn't call it therapeutic.
Okay, think of it like this. It's like facing your fears,
Right.
but instead of a spider, it's a whole horde of zombies. By facing these anxieties in a story, we make a space to examine them, to understand them, and maybe even get a sense of control over them. We get to feel the thrill of fear and danger, but safely, because it's just a story.
So, like a kind of emotional release. We get to indulge in the dark stuff, explore these themes, but in a way that makes us feel better in the end.
Exactly. And think about it. We don't watch horror movies because we want bad things to
Hmm.
happen. We watch because we want to experience those possibilities in a safe way.
Yeah.
And when we do that, we might actually learn something about ourselves, about how resilient we are, and maybe even find a way to be less afraid.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. It's like those anxieties are already in us somewhere deep down. And when we watch these stories, it's like we're shining a light on those anxieties, and that helps us deal with them.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's like we're confronting the darkness, but we're doing it on our own terms.
Hmm.
And often we actually come out of it feeling stronger. Like we've looked into the abyss and we didn't flinch.
Okay, so we've got zombies who represent giving in to those urges and vampires who are more in control of them. But you were saying something earlier about redemption. How does that fit in? Can a monster really change for the better?
Now, that is a question that's been around for a long time. And it's one that Volkan actually explores in relation to the movie Warm Bodies.
Warm Bodies.
But-
That's the one with the zombie who falls in love, right? Not your typical zombie movie.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so fascinating psychologically. It takes this creature that we associate with the death drive, with losing your sense of self and your purpose, and it shows us that change is possible.
So is this a zombie who starts a book club or something?
Not exactly, although I like the image.
Yeah.
What Warm Bodies explores is the idea of a zombie who starts to feel love-like, real genuine love, and by doing that, he starts to become human again.
Love conquers all, huh? Even the zombie apocalypse. That's actually kind of sweet when you think about it.
It is, and it suggests that even when things are really bad, even when we feel totally lost and alone, the power of human connection, of love and empathy can bring us back.
So it's like love is the cure for the zombie virus, the power of connection beating out even those primal urges.
You could say that. It suggests that no matter how far gone we are, there's something inside us that still wants connection, meaning something more than just existing.
That's really powerful. And it makes me think about other zombie stories too, like The Walking Dead. The thing that keeps those characters going, even with all that horror, is the connections they have with each other, their bonds of family and friendship.
Absolutely. That's a perfect example. It's like when the world falls apart, when everything we know is gone,
Yeah.
those connections, those bonds of love and loyalty become even more important. They remind us what it means to be human, what's worth fighting for.
Wow. Okay. I'm getting chills over here.
It's powerful stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it shows us why these monster stories are so important. They're not just here to scare us. They're here to show us our deepest fears and anxieties, but also to remind us of what makes us human, what we're capable of, even when things are really bad.
This has been an incredible conversation. We've covered how zombies and vampires embody different parts of ourselves, our fears, our anxieties. But what about the bigger picture? What about the ways they reflect our anxieties about society as a whole?
That is a great question. And it's something that Volkan goes into in a lot of detail. In fact, he says that the reason zombies are so popular is because they speak to some very real fears we have about the future of society.
Okay, I'm definitely interested in hearing more. Tell me everything. So we've talked about zombies as like these individual monsters, embodying our fears of death and losing control. But you're saying there's this whole other level where they reflect like anxieties about society as a whole.
Exactly. It's not just about what happens to us individually, but what happens to us as a collective. When you think about those classic zombie images, the shambling horde, the relentless advance of the infected, the complete collapse of order, it speaks to something much bigger than just our personal fears.
Right, like it's tapping into this fear of what if society just falls apart?
Precisely. It's that fear of societal collapse that the zombie embodies so well. And the infectious nature of the outbreak. It's not just about disease, it's about that fear of the other spreading uncontrollably, turning into mob mentality.
And it's not even just about external threats, right? It's also about that internal collapse that happens at a zombie apocalypse reason. Goes out the window, people turning on each other.
Exactly. It's not just about the zombies themselves. It's about what happens to the humans when the rules no longer apply. How far are people willing to go? What choices will they make to survive? Those questions tap into our deepest anxieties about human nature, about that potential for darkness that I think we all recognize exists within us.
It's like in those zombie stories where the real horror isn't the zombies, it's what the other humans are willing to do to each other.
Exactly. The breakdown of morality, the fight for resources, the violence, those are all reflections of very real societal anxieties. It's that question we've been grappling with for centuries. When civilization crumbles, what happens to our humanity?
And it feels like those anxieties are even more heightened today, don't you think? With climate change, political divisions, all the uncertainty, it's like we're living in a world where a zombie apocalypse feels less like fiction and more like a very real possibility.
Absolutely. And I think that's a big part of why zombie stories resonate so strongly with us these days. They reflect that sense of unease about the state of the world, that feeling that things are becoming increasingly unstable and unpredictable.
So, in a way, as much as we love to be scared by them, zombies also serve this kind of cathartic function. They're like a safe space to confront these huge societal anxieties without actually having to live through them.
Precisely. It's a way to explore those what-if scenarios, to process our anxieties about the future, but within the confines of fiction. And through that exploration, we might find ways to feel less powerless, less overwhelmed by the very real challenges we face in the world.
Like a form of cultural therapy.
Exactly. We get to work through those collective anxieties by watching fictional characters navigate the end of the world.
Which, when you say it out loud, sounds kind of strange.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But there's definitely something to it.
There is. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about zombies, vampires, all sorts of monsters and what they say about us. But at the end of the day, what do you think is the most important thing for people to take away from these stories? What's the big takeaway here?
That's a great question. And I think for me, it comes down to this. As terrifying as these stories can be, they remind us that even in the darkest of times, even when faced with unimaginable horror, there's still hope. There's still the possibility for connection, for resilience, for courage. And ultimately, that's what makes these stories so powerful and so enduring. They force us to confront our deepest fears, but they also remind us of what it means to be human, of what makes life worth fighting for, even in the face of the apocalypse.
Wow, that's powerful stuff. I gotta say, I never thought I'd find so much depth and meaning in a genre about brain-eating monsters, but here we are.
It just goes to show that sometimes the most profound insights can come from the most unexpected places.
This has been an incredible deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this journey into the heart of the zombie psyche. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and maybe sleep with one eye open.